Welcome to another installment of my Q&A, which is questions and anecdotes. I have three things I'm going to share. First, readers of my amazing bloop, bloop, bloop. First, readers of my amazing Conroy writings have often asked me whether the hypnosis we see in those stories is legitimate and real, or completely faked and made up. And the answer to that is yes. The explanation is pretty simple, though. I've always been interested in hypnosis, but when I started writing Conroy, I hadn't had any formal training. Circumstances never quite aligned, having the time to take a course and the money to pay for that course, and an appropriate course being available within a reasonable distance from me. As a result, in the first few stories, some of the hypnotic details are faked, though not completely made up. I was drawing heavily on my background as a cognitive psychologist, extrapolating from what I knew about the human mind. Eventually, though, all those circumstances I mentioned, well, they aligned, and I was able to travel to New York City and become certified as a hypnotherapist. From that point on, any mention of trance, hypnosis, or hypnotic techniques are based much more on what we know about the field. It's so much more fun to write it when you're getting the details right, and the training allowed me to expand just how daring I wanted to get with having a character hypnotize various aliens. Mind you, I always left myself an out because typically Conroy is hypnotizing non-humans, and who knows how their heads work. A Mr. Richard bloop bloop bloop. A Mr. Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey wrote in to ask me about conventions. Did I like going to conventions? How often? What size conventions? Do I prefer local events or regional events? What about the big mama jamas like the World Con or even the super mega giant events like Dragon Con or Comic Con? And when I'm at conventions, what do I like to do? Do I collect autographs of other authors? Do I want to attend readings? Am I there for the panels? Well, Mr. Feder, that's a lot of questions, but I'm going to try to do my best to answer them. My favorite conventions are probably the World Cons because the location changes from year to year, and my wife and I get to go someplace interesting that we may never have visited before. We get to taste the local cuisine, which is always fun, because my wife's favorite thing to do with Worldcon is not to attend the convention at all, but to make dinner reservations and put together small dining parties. It's our thing. Next up, I'd say I'm very fond of the regionals and smaller cons because they're big enough to be interesting and attract a nice variety of people, both professionals and fans, and I can happily lose myself. I don't get to many of the smaller cons because, let's face it, it's going to conventions is a business for me. I'm there to meet with existing fans, attract potential readers, to dazzle on a good day. But there's only so many days that I can travel, and these things cost money. That said, all bets are off if I'm a guest of honor, which it's been my pleasure to be on multiple occasions, because then the convention is picking up my expenses, all based on the theory that I am a draw that will bring in other attendees. Ha, little do they know. As for the really, really large events like Comic Con and Dragon Con, I confess I'm not a fan. I tend to get a little claustrophobic and become very uncomfortable. Now, I have many friends and colleagues who adore Dragon Con. I just don't imagine myself ever going. It's too much for me. I have been to New York Comic Con once, but that was when Barsk was about to come out and my publisher wanted me there for promotional purposes. So they provided me with a handler who basically said, Lawrence, come with me. Lawrence, sit here and sign books. Lawrence, go up on stage and entertain the people as part of some shtick. And mercifully, at the end of the day, said, Lawrence, you're free to go. Let me escort you to the exit so you can escape. I had a fine time, but I doubt I could have done it on my own. I was totally overwhelmed and out of my comfort zone. But the funny thing is, I left the conference center in New York and caught my train to go home that Friday night. Saturday morning, I jumped in my car and drove down to my favorite regional convention in the DC area, and it was just what I needed. As to what I look for, or what I look forward to at conventions, keep in mind that I've been attending them for more than 30 years. The same panels that may seem new and exciting and different to others are things I've done a dozen or more times. I'm not likely to get any new insights on the latest iteration of a panel entitled something like Plot versus Character, which drives the story. Every now and then, though, a panel will be about a new idea, something I've never seen before, and that's just fantastic. I've had the great good fortune to be on a few of those. One that comes to mind was a panel at Caplave entitled Toxic Productivity, and it was a huge eye opener. Great, great fun, really taxed us. I think everybody in the room, both the audience and the panelists, went away just stunned. But for the most part, I don't attend panels. Since getting sick, I'm unable to get to too many conventions at all, and when I do, since I'm still seriously immunocompromised, I don't want to be in a crowded room listening to a panel and sitting shoulder to shoulder with other people, even if we're all masked. It just seems like stacking the deck against myself. It's something else if I'm one of a number of people on that panel up on the dais, with a good deal of open space between me and the audience. As a result, the past few years, when I've made it to conventions, I spent a lot of time sitting in a spacious lobby and letting people come to me and having small conversation. And I got to tell you, that's always delightful. But one exception of programming I've always gone to, even before the cancer, is readings. I particularly like going to readings by friends to be supportive, but also of writers I don't know and have never read before. So I can hear them, literally hear them, and get their voices in my head, so that when I pick up their books later on, there they are reading aloud to me in a mental space, as it were. Ironically, or maybe it's just sad, but with the exception of those performed by a guest of honor, readings are not well attended at most conventions. Maybe they're not all that well publicized. Or it could be there's just too many of them and they kind of blur for the attendees. As a consequence, often they have a good sized room, just in case, but it's far from full, and the people sit scattered around the room. Well, for me, that's been really good in recent years because no one's sitting next to me, maybe not even in my same row, and I can go in and enjoy the event. And that's a beautiful thing. And of course, I love giving readings. As this video should clearly show, I love the sound of my own voice. And as with panels, I'm sitting far enough back from my audience, assuming I have an audience, that I can comfortably take a mask off and speak directly to them, slipping that mask back on at the end of the reading before leaving the room. But my favorite thing to do at conventions, even more than readings, is the coffee clatch. These are small, limited gatherings, usually 9 or 10 people sitting around a large table, asking questions, sharing stories, giving input and insight into things I've written, and so forth. It can be a very intimate setting, and it's limited by signups. You have to put your name on a list, and when all the openings are gone, well, you can add yourself to the standby list and hope you get in. I always do coffee clatches. In the early days, not surprisingly, nobody came. Nobody knew me or knew me well enough to care, and that was good. I used to call coffee clatches ego adjustment exercises. It really knocked me down a peg, sometimes several. And that was fine. I knew that. But when Bar's the Elephant's Graveyard came out, that all changed. I showed up at the convention, went to my seat at the appointed time, and my coffee clatch sign-up sheet was full with alternates waiting, hoping that somebody who had signed up wouldn't show so they could jump in the queue. It's a wonderful thing to spend an hour with people who not only want to hear you, want to talk with you about what you do. I've made some really nice connections that way, and I hope to keep doing so. One thing you should know about the coffee klatch, it's always BYOB, in my experience at least. I don't drink coffee or tea, or for the alcoholic version, it's bring your own beer, but I don't drink that either. Usually I'm there with a Diet Coke. And that's fine. They're pretty ubiquitous. Okay, so this last anecdote, well, it's my Harry Harrison story. Harry's since passed, but in his day, he was a very prolific and very well-known science fiction author, probably most renowned for his series of books about the stainless steel rat. Some of you may know him as the author of the novel Make Room, which was later turned into the movie Soylent Green. Trivia point. Soylent Green was the last film that Edward G. Robinson was in. But I digress. This happened at a convention somewhere on the East Coast, probably Boston. I don't remember which con it was, and I don't remember what year. I think Werner Vinge was the guest of honor. Anyway, I was one of 5 people on a panel. Seated at the far right was Werner, somebody I don't really know. And I'm pretty positive he doesn't know me either. To his left were 2 other people I didn't know and don't remember, and then Harry, and then me on the far left hand. I can't even tell you what the topic of the panel was. But just as the moderator was about to call the panel to order, Harry interrupts and in a loud voice proclaims, I just want to say one thing and then I'm done. While the rest of the panel was quiet and the room falls silent, and Harry again gazes out at the audience and then turns to me and points a finger at me and says, I don't believe anything this man has to say. And again, we're all stunned, and you can hear the entire room draw this collective gasp. I take a moment, wet my lips, turn back to Harry, and I said, well, gee, Harry, the only thing I wanted to say was that I think you're one of the field's national treasures. Boom! Gobsmacked! Anyway, it was all in good fun with Harry because we'd known each other a few years, and he was always very generous and gracious with me. He knew my doctorate was in psychology, and he'd like to talk to me about the topic, possibly because it fed into his books, but more likely because his daughter was working on her degree in that area. Anyway, Harry was a great guy, and he is very much missed. And that's it for this month's questions and anecdotes. Feel free to write in at the address shown below. I think I've got it in there. Check and see, somewhere in there. And ask me questions or what anecdotes you want to hear about, stories and so forth. Put Q&A in the subject line and I'll get back to you, I promise. Well, I won't get back to you necessarily, but I'll get back to the points you raise in a future Q&A post. Thanks so much for watching.